Welcome to Learner's Planet. Now in this class of biology, we are going to continue with the topic Fundamental Unit of Life. In the previous sessions, we have already studied about this basic unit. That is, the fundamental unit of life is cell. Cell is a basic structural and functional unit. Until now, by going through several these sessions, all these things must be very clear that why we are calling cell as a structural and functional unit of life. Although all cells, they differ from each other in some or the other aspect, but still we have studied that all of them are basically made up of several components. Which components? Plasma membrane or the cell membrane, the nucleus and the cytoplasm. Now these three things are essentially present in all type of cells. In the previous session we have studied about the plasma membrane or the cell membrane. We have studied that how this plasma membrane is forming a boundary line for any of the cell. Now in this session we will continue. We will study about the another boundary line, that is cell wall. As the plasma membrane or the cell membrane is present in all of the cells, there are some different kind of cells which possess another membrane outside this plasma membrane. Now, just for the reminder, we said in the previous session that cell membrane, it could be a membrane which is surrounding the organelle, whereas there is an outer boundary line which encloses all these organelles, nucleus and cytoplasm, and that boundary line is known as plasma membrane. In case of plants, the cells are having another outer thick wall, and that thick boundary in the plant cells is known as cell wall. Now this cell wall you can see in this diagram also. This is a diagram of plant cell. It is just a section of a plant cell. This inner line, this you can say, this is a plasma membrane, and that is enclosing these particular, this is the structure of mitochondria, cytoplasm and other parts are present. Now this plasma membrane, basically it is going to enclose all these inner material. You can see this particular membrane. This is what? This is plasma membrane. Inside that, what all parts are present? It is cytoplasm, mitochondria. This is mitochondria, whereas these granule-like structures scattered here, this is cytoplasm. And then another thick wall is present here. This thick wall is known as cell wall. Now cell wall is not present in all type of cells. It is present in the plants, it is present here in the bacterial cells, it is present in the fungal cells, but it is strictly absent in animal cells. None of the animal cell is going to possess this plant cell, this type of cell wall. So in some of the organisms we can say that they are surrounded by another additional membrane which is known as cell wall. Now this particular cell wall, it has some basic properties, like it is thick. It is not so thin as in the case of plasma membrane, because it is formed by the deposition of various kind of molecules. Especially which molecule? Cellulose. Besides that, there is the deposition of several other kind of molecules so as to thicken the particular membrane or the cell wall. Further, now such type of deposition of such molecules will make it rigid in nature. It is very rigid. You all must be knowing what we mean by the rigid. It is tough. It is non-flexible. You remember, plasma membrane is a flexible membrane, and opposite to that, the cell wall is actually rigid. Plasma membrane, it was thin. Rather, this cell wall is thick. Further, cell wall is non-living, and this is something very important. It is non-living while the plasma membrane was living in nature. Comparatively, this cell wall is permeable, but the plasma membrane was selectively or semi-permeable in nature. Here, the permeability is more as compared to the plasma membrane. Now, all these we are going to study in detail one by one. Further, we are saying that these are made up of several chemical molecules, and these chemical molecules, they are secreted by the cell itself. And why it is present? That question must be there in your mind. This extra membrane is present so as to provide protection to the plasma membrane as well as other parts of the cell. You must be knowing, we are saying since beginning that it is present in the case of bacteria, fungus and plant cells. Now, can you compare the physical surroundings of these living organisms as compared to those of animal cells? You can see the difference. Animals, they are more and more free to run away from the physical conditions. They can protect themselves by changing their own surrounding conditions. But the plants, they are standing, they are non-locomotory, they are non-motile. They are directly exposed to the physical conditions, like we can say for example storms, or we can say speedy wind and so on. Whatever high temperature or low temperature, all these situations are directly affecting these type of organisms. So, to protect themselves against all such kind of conditions, definitely they need certain extra protection. And that extra protection is actually provided by the by the cell wall. In the case of bacteria, it is a unicellular organism. So the minor changes in its surrounding is definitely going to affect the organism adversely. So to protect themselves, they need such type of cell wall. So further we can say there are some more important properties or the features of this membrane which can be illustrated through this particular diagram. Cell wall, it is a dead membrane. Previously also we have said that it is a non-living membrane. So this is the first point to be kept in your mind. Think. Now just imagine why it is known as a dead membrane. The reason is that when we are going to work on these plant cells in the laboratory, and in case if we remove the outer this cell wall, then what will happen? The cell is supposed to die. If that outer boundary is removed from the cell, then definitely the cell must die. But it does not happen in the case of plant cells. If the outer boundary of an animal cell is removed, then those animal cells will not survive. They will not grow on media in the laboratory also. So this is the reason that if this membrane, that is cell wall, even if it is removed from the cell, even then the cell is able to survive if the osmotic conditions are maintained properly. That means if the cells are properly placed in the isotonic solution, or accordingly whatever favorable situation is required for the growth, if all those are provided, then these cells can always survive. But of course, if the condition is becoming hypotonic or hypertonic, or it is not favorable, then definitely the cell cannot survive, but rather it has tendency to survive even in the absence of cell wall under the standard conditions. And this is why we are calling it as a dead membrane, because its presence does not matter if the situation is optimum. Next is, it is present in the plant cells. This is the second point that you must understand. Before we say it is present in plant, think on the another side why we are just highlighting this point here. The reason is that because it is absent absolutely or completely in the animal cells. Now if it is present in the plant cells, then what is its nature? Or it is made up of we can say cellulose. Chemically, it is made up of cellulose in the plant cells. It is also present in the fungal and the bacterial cells. So this is the next point. Now why we are keeping these two things in the separate boxes? The reason is that the chemical composition of both these is different. In the plant cell and in the fungus or the bacteria, each possesses a cell wall, but the chemical nature of each is going to be different. So, if chemically it is different, then definitely its most of the properties are going to vary in terms of its permeability, in terms of its flexibility or its rigidness, and so on. Further, it is a permeable membrane. This is the next point. What we mean by permeability? Permeability means the substances or the water is able to pass through the particular membrane. So that means what? If the pores are present which allows the passage of various material. So this property of movement or this property of passage of the molecules is known as permeability. So in the case of plasma membrane, it was semi-permeable. That means it allows only some of the molecules to pass across the membrane. Whereas in the cell wall, it will allow the various solutions, various water molecules or other solid substrates and so many things to pass across it. But of course, later on it is restricted by the plasma membrane which is underlying the cell wall. So therefore, all the cell wall will allow all the entire thing to enter inside the cell, but still it is controlled further due to by the presence of the plasma membrane. And of course, this provides the advantage. Just imagine if only cell wall is present in surrounding a cytoplasm and there is no plasma membrane, then what will happen? Such a permeability nature will completely destruct the cell. So to prevent this thing, already the plasma membrane is present. So whether it is cell wall or whether it is plasma membrane, each is going to impart its important role to the cell. How? Plasma membrane, it will control the movement of particles in and out of the cell. And cell wall, although it is permeable, but still it is dead and it is rigid in nature. So definitely it is going to provide protection to the cell. Further, the cell wall is made up of polysaccharides. You know what we mean by polysaccharides? Saccharides means sugar. Poly means many. So it is made up of a kind of a molecule which is made by joining of so many sugar units. It is a polymer of glucose units. Glucose is a sugar and so many sugar units they together bind with each other at a particular position and that forms the cellulose. So cellulose is nothing but it is a kind of a polysaccharide. In the case of plant cell, it is made up of cellulose. PC, I am writing it as a short form, but it is plant cell. Further, in the case of fungus, it is made up of another unit. You know it is made up of what? It is made up of chitin. Further, in the case of bacteria, it is made up of another kind of sugar unit or complex sugar unit which we call as peptidoglycan. Now, peptidoglycan is a complex type of sugar in which the protein units are also attached. So all these units, these are the sugars and they are forming the cell wall of different organisms or different type of cells. Thus we said that although they are present in different kind of organisms, but its chemical nature is different. And definitely if the chemical nature is different, then the other properties will also vary. Further, the membrane is rigid, that we have already studied. And this rigid nature will help in providing the definite shape to the living cells. which cells where the cell wall is present. Not all. The reason is that plasma membrane is flexible, so it can change the shape, but cell wall is rigid. So this rigidity will help in providing the definite shape to the plant cell. Besides that, it is said to be a protective layer. Why it is said to be a protective layer? The reason is that because it helps the cell to tolerate the harsh conditions present in surrounding. We can just help you in understanding this point. Let us assume an example here. That is, let us say it is a bacteria. Now bacteria, let us say it is present in the soil. A soil also contains the water molecules, and these water molecules will form a thin film in surrounding the bacteria. So now what will happen? This high concentration of water, the water amount seems to be high in surrounding. Or let us assume, in simple terms, let us say, if suppose a bacteria is present in a hypotonic medium, what will happen? The water molecules, they will tend to move from outside to inside. As it moves inside, then what will happen? The cell will show swelling, and it is going to swell up. It will show endoosmosis process, due to which the cells will swell. And a time will come when the membrane cannot tolerate this expansion, and therefore it is going to burst. But this bursting does not happen in such cells. Why it is so? Because of the presence of this rigid, hard or non-flexible cell wall. As it is present in surrounding, it will control the expansion and it will make the cell to appear turgid. Rather, it won't allow the cell to get burst over there. And of course, when the situation is controlled, the rate of water movements will also be controlled. So these are the basic common properties of the cell wall. So although the cell is having different composition in its cell wall, but still the function is more or less similar. Now, let us study about the structure of the cell wall. We said in the previous slide also that the cell wall is made up of polysaccharides. In the case of plant cell, it is made up of a fibrous polysaccharide. Which fibrous polysaccharide? It is cellulose. These cellulose molecules, there are so many molecules of cellulose which are united together to form certain fiber-like structures. And those fibers of the cellulose, they are known as microfibrils. Let us understand it with the help of the diagram. This bottom yellow base, this is actually the plasma membrane. Then above that you can see this blue line here. This is forming a primary cell wall. And then later on it is also having the middle lamella. So plasma membrane we have already studied. Now the cell wall is made up of fibrous polysaccharides, that is cellulose. These cellulose, we said, they are arranged in the form of fibers. And these fibers, you can see these blue fibers here, these are known as cellulose microfibrils. Now these microfibrils, so many microfibrils will constitute the cell wall. Now each has to interact with each other, they have to bind with each other. Therefore they can provide the compactness to the membrane and they can provide the protection. So this rigidity is increased by the cross linkages. So they are actually packed in between by the special molecules called pectin molecule. Besides, they can also form the bonds with each other, and those bonds are known as cross-linking glycan. In between, whatever space is present between these molecules or the microfibril, it is filled with the pectin and hemicellulose. So these molecules, pectin, they will function as a gluing agent over there. They help to stick the molecules close to each other. These pectin molecules, it is further we said, it is comprised of it is glued together by the another type of polysaccharide, that is pectin and hemicellulose. Now these pectin and hemicelluloses, they are mixed, they are a kind of complex polysaccharide. Complex polysaccharide means what? It means that it is a polysaccharide, but it is having other additional units besides sugar units. So sugar, and it is a combination with another kind of some molecule. So these molecules, they are going to help in binding of the microfibers together. You can see these pink fibers here. These pink fibers, they are the pectin molecules, and they are holding the units, microfibril units together. Besides this, the cell of adjacent cells, they are also attached to each other. Now how these adjacent cell walls are attached? There are so many cells which are forming the tissue, or so many cells are forming the final organism. Now can you think how these cells are held together? It is with the help of a special jelly-like substance which is present in between the two adjacent cell walls, and that substance is known as pectin. It is made up of calcium and magnesium pectate. Now this special substance, it will form a kind of jelly-like substance, and it is present here as a thin layer in between the two cells. So if suppose this is one of the cell, another cell will be present, and they both will be joined together by this special thin layer. And this thin layer, which is made up of calcium or magnesium pectate, is known as middle lamella. So now you can think that what function or the role is played by this middle lamella. It will help in the interaction between the two adjacent cells. It will help them to bound together, or they have to be placed together. And of course, another point is that it is going to help in the cell-to-cell interaction, to convey the message of one cell to the another. Or we can say it will help in the intercommunication of the different cells. Besides this, in the plant cells, these cell walls, they are not 100% continuous. In between there are some pits. You can see this small hole in this green outline is resembling the cell wall, and in between that there is a gap. You can see these gaps here. So this gap is actually known as plasmodesmata. So this plasmodesmata, this is actually forming the, I'm sorry, the spelling is not written properly here. It is M-A-T-A at last. It is plasmodesmata. So this plasmodesmata is a aperture or the pores which are present in between the three cell wall, and they are forming a bridge with the next adjacent cell. So therefore the cytoplasm of one cell can communicate directly with the cytoplasm of the another cell. So this is the kind of bridge between the two cells. So this is how the cell wall is actually, it is providing the protection to the cells, as well as in the multicellular organism, it also helps in the cell-cell interaction. So basically, the protection is provided because of its rigid, non-flexible and dead nature. Whereas, why it is rigid? Because of the chemical composition, because of the cellulose molecules. Not only this much, they also help in the intercellular communication. And how this intercellular communication is possible? It is due to the presence of plasmodesmata or middle lamella kind of structures. See, in the case of animal cells, such type of interactions or such type of special structures were not needed. The reason is that because they do not have cell wall. Plasma membrane is thin enough that it can communicate directly with the surrounding cells. But such type of barrier, that is the cell wall, it is so thick and it is non-flexible. It won't allow the intercommunication. It won't allow the two cells to, in the close proximity, they cannot communicate properly with each other due to the presence of the cell wall. So, to prevent such type of problems, the plasmodesmata and middle lamella kind of structures are present in such type of cells. If the cellular interaction is inhibited, can you think what will happen? The normal coordination of function is not going to take place. And definitely, if such coordination is affected, the entire cellular function will be interrupted. And so, the organism may die also. So, maintain the proper functioning, these type of structures supports a lot in these cells. So, this is all about the structure and properties of the cell wall. Next, we are going to study about the functions of the cell wall. That what kind of role is played by the cell wall in different type of organisms. So, that we are going to continue in the next class or the next session. Till then, thank you so much. Have a nice day.